I think that there's a lot of ways that people can think about getting started that may not be so apparently obvious, but a lot of brands and companies, of course, are leveraging their customers for testimonials, guest speaking experiences. That's a really great way to test the waters, if you will, as far as what would it be like to work with a brand outside of my day-to-day 9 to 5 W-2 job. And that's a really soft entry point, I feel like, for a lot of people that have a W-2 full-time job to start to, one, discover their voice and discover their unique point of view. Two, get the feeling of what it looks like to have that kind of relationship with another brand and another vendor, and then just test it out.
Hey, I'm Corrina.
And I'm Taylor.
And this is Direct, a podcast we created to showcase the creativity and hard work of go-to-market teams everywhere.
We're here to share the stories and experiences of the hardworking, passionate individuals who make up go-to-market teams, ones who truly make the magic happen.
Taylor and I have been fortunate enough to work side by side on some incredible projects together, and now we want to put a spotlight on the unsung heroes behind some of the best go-to-market campaigns out there.
In each episode, you'll hear from individual contributors who have gone above and beyond to make a difference. They'll share their challenges, victories, and the lessons they've learned along the way, all to help you unlock the next step in your career. Get ready to be inspired, learn something new, maybe even share a laugh or two.
Welcome to Direct.
Welcome back to another episode of Direct with Corrina and Taylor. I'm Corrina.
And I'm Taylor.
And today we're doing things slightly differently than we normally have in the past. We have no guests. It's just going to be Taylor and I chatting about some topics that our network, friends, and colleagues, and even listeners have posed back to us.
So we're excited to be chatting today. Our first question and answer take is on a question we've got around being quote unquote micro influencers, the pros, the cons, how it's impacted our careers and networking, and really getting into not just the how-to, which we've dug into with other guests in the past, but the personal experiences that we've both had. More Corrina than myself. I very much dodge in and out of being a public person online, but in getting guest spots, speaking as a subject matter expert, like how has that impacted our careers positively or negatively? So Corrina, how would you define micro-influencer for yourself and whether you or I even fit into that before we get into some pros and cons?
I think the way most B2B companies would approach a micro-influencer is to strip away number of followers, strip away maybe the brand that they're associated, and really just look at, has this person cultivated an audience that fits my target ICP? And that removes a little bit of the expectation of being the top voice on LinkedIn, as an example, or having 50K followers. It's more, are they somebody that is getting engagement with their audience? So if they do a post, is the right audience interacting? Are they actively replying back to comments they get from their audience? That would be a network that some B2B companies might want to leverage and rent and essentially work with them on a maybe smaller pilot scale than somebody that's been turning these contracts day in and day out. I think that there's a lot of ways that people can think about getting started that may not be so apparently obvious, but a lot of brands and companies, of course, are leveraging their customers for testimonials, guest speaking experiences. That's a really great way to test the waters, if you will, as far as what would it be like to work with a brand outside of my day-to-day 9 to 5 W-2 job. And that's a really soft entry point, I feel like, for a lot of people that have a W-2 full-time job to start to, one, discover their voice and discover their unique point of view. Two, get the feeling of what it looks like to have that kind of relationship with another brand and another vendor, and then just test it out. See if they feel comfortable speaking on a webinar. See if they like creating video content. See if they like posting frequently on LinkedIn. It's a nice entryway to start. And those are likely not going to be paid opportunities. So that could be a way to test out if this might be something for you personally as the person being the influencer. And it's also a way for the brands to test too, if this is like a viable avenue to generate awareness, get traffic, et cetera.
Absolutely. And we know that both of us have started in that arena where there is a company that you work with in your day to day that you're having some success with that company. They invite you to do a case study. This is a fantastic quid pro quo because it helps you if you get a taste of if you want to build a personal brand in order to become eventually some type of influencer, if you want to get more subject matter expert speaking engagements, but it also very much benefits the brand. And those brands are chomping at the bit to always get people in to speak highly of them or just speak on their behalf. Because as someone who works at a brand, it's just a different vibe. Like you said, whether they have 50,000 followers or 3,000 followers, when someone else, a customer, is talking about the product or the services, it's a totally different vibe than just having your own employees coming and doing the same old circuit. So knowing that, let's get into a little bit of a pro con here. We've talked about kind of what got us started into this. What are some of the pros that have happened, especially in the last couple of years for you, Corrina?
For me, it's been a really great just confidence booster, having the ability to work with different brands, get their perspective on my point of view, help me as another distribution channel to find and tap into new audiences. I feel super fortunate that I started as many years ago as I did, because I feel that it's really given me a groundwork that if I just launched a new website today, I wouldn't have nearly as many at bats as I do from just having been a part of the speaking circuit with different brands and companies in the space for so long. So that's a huge pro to think about. This is something that is going to be there like in perpetuity, right? That could be a con too, but I'm still finding that a lot of the fractional or the companies I work with from a fractional perspective, a lot of them are telling me that like, hey, I just found you on a podcast, and I'll find out what podcast it was, and it may have been something I've done years ago. So from that perspective, it's super helpful. I think too, you become really like you're the hero in the hero's journey when you're becoming either a testimonial, a case study, or maybe you're being leveraged as an influencer to generate net new content, be a keynote speaker. And the companies that are sponsoring you, paid or not paid, are doing a lot of legwork to ensure that it's a success, because there's hard ROI that the companies associate with these types of engagements. So they want to see that this is successful. So you're going to have a lot of help with maybe fine tuning and editing your content. Maybe it's a lot of actual like speaking gear, a nice camera set, lighting, microphones, what have you. So there's a lot of perspective you can get that I don't think a lot of W-2 companies would afford one singular person, unless maybe you're at the C-suite, that you can get. For cons, what are some cons that come to your mind immediately?
I would agree on a lot of those pros. First, that is, I think, the confidence boost of understanding like, hey, I have something to say. I have a voice in this arena, even if it's still uncomfortable for me because I'm an introvert, to be like, hey, I am a subject matter expert on this topic, and I do deserve to be able to speak and help people. But cons have definitely occurred. I think what's interesting, and I'd love to get your perspective on the brand's point of view here too, but as the individual who has a full-time job and is trying to do this, there are interpersonal impacts, I think, for positive, growing your network, meeting people, having your face out there, having people find you, like you were talking about. Internally, sometimes at the job that you're at right now, there can be a little bit of strife. Who does she think she is that she's going on these speaking engagements or talking about this, or even this level of, I don't want to call it jealousy, but this frustration or friction in why does she get to do that? Or why does she think she gets to speak on this? That is just something that people are not talking about, I think, in the overall market. And the people that are doing this online and doing it well are not always talking about those cons. Have you felt any of that, and what do you think from the brand perspective?
Yeah, I think initially there's a lot of intrigue, right? I think a lot of brands will even want to hire some of these influencers because, again, they're taking on a lot of the network that they built, and there's a lot of credibility association that happens when you do that. But then I have found with many other peers too, is that long term, that does start to be seen as a negative for whatever reason. Even if you can structure your contracts with your employer, even if you're following all their communication guidelines, there tends to be, I think maybe even as of recently, like over the last couple of years with all the challenges we've had is with the economy, I think there tends to be this perception of if you have time to write a LinkedIn post, then why won't you take up this additional responsibility internally? Or if you could take off time to go speak at this conference, you're not as invested in this company as you should be. And you can do a lot of that legwork on the front end to make sure that everything is in line with your contract. They're happy with you being associated with other brands, but unfortunately, we're still dealing with humans. And as things come up, as things change, there may be some challenges that you're faced with. And I think what I would say is just always have a CYA. Make sure that you have a written documentation that you got approval. Make sure that you are speaking about the brand in a positive way. So there is some tie-in back to the brand that you're representing predominantly. Make sure that you are over communicating what you're doing as your day-to-day 9 to 5 jobs, and that everyone is in alignment and has clear visibility so that you can, once that noise does come up, if it does come up, that you can quiet that down with those 3 things as like a backup and a CYA.
Yeah. It's an incredibly important perspective to have, knowing that CYA concept for anybody who wants to come through this as well. I'm thinking from the brand side, we know that this is very valuable. Of course, there may be a level of risk when you are associating with, if someone's really well known out there, and we're both marketers, sometimes if they're saying something that's not on brand in alignment with their full-time job, but they're trying to represent themselves as a personal brand, obviously there's a level of risk there. So I get it if there is some strife internally about employee micro-influencers and what they're doing. But I also think that, to your point, if the contract doesn't say anything that you're not allowed to do this, or the social guidelines in any of the contracts, and if you've gone ahead and preemptively said, hey, these are a couple of things that I'm doing, is this cool with you guys? Definitely covering your butt in that regard. But that's a little level of risk from the company side, but there's definitely a lot of benefits from the company side to have internal employees doing this for them as well.
What's so funny is I do think the last 3 to 4 jobs that I've held full time, I've had a list of, in-person speaking engagements that I was a part of, webinars, white papers, case studies, partnerships, podcast episodes. I had a handful of those from any job that hired me. And I know, just based on the conversations I had, that they not only, one, saw that and appreciated that, they took the time to tell me that, they encouraged and said that they were seeking to have more people internally at their company that would be these brand personalities. So it's interesting that what initially draws some companies, it eventually becomes a thing that you have to talk about and align on more frequently. So I would say be cognizant that this might be something that does attract new opportunities for you, which is fantastic. But take the time to really make sure that this is something that they do want to continue to support you doing. And as long as you're both communicating transparently, then that should be okay. I do hesitate. I know a lot of people that do things on the side and they don't share. And I think that as long as you're abiding by your contracts, do you. But I would rather be totally transparent and say, hey, here's what I'm doing, just to avoid any potential conflict or mistrust down the line. So I think it's better to align early than disclose later.
I'd agree entirely. And I think what we've seen, especially you mentioned the economy, the last year or so, we've also seen that just because you're a brand personality or brand micro-influencer for your own brand isn't necessarily job security. So we shouldn't expect that either, because we've seen some really incredible subject matter experts landed in this awful trap of layoffs recently. Not that it's specifically because they're doing this for an individual brand, but that I only bring it up because it's not necessarily certain job security. And the benefit of having that voice is those people can typically get placed really quickly, or what I've seen most lately is they have the opportunity to team up with someone else and maybe start a fractional or start a founder of a new firm, agency, what have you, because of that influence and the audiences that they have.
For sure. I think you're bringing up an interesting perspective too, which is I think so many people like you and I, Taylor, have been told that we have a very entrepreneurial mindset. And so do influencers. So I think that when you're becoming an influencer, you're starting to be your own representative of sorts. And so you start to structure what your pricing is, structure how you work together. There's a lot of skills you gain from doing this consistently on your own that do, to your point, Taylor, set you really well up to potentially go out on your own or partner with other consultancies on a much bigger scale than maybe just a short influencer campaign. So there's still benefits to a person exploring with this, especially if it's a very well-structured program. I think you'll find that a lot of brands are testing this out and they don't really know. I've talked to a lot of brands that are just starting to dabble with this, and they'll get my perspective knowing that I've done this in the past. And there's no real like industry consistency when it comes to pricing of a LinkedIn post, just as an example, or video or podcast appearance or speaking appearance. So there's still a lot of opportunity because of that. So that's a pro, in my opinion. You have an opportunity to become more of an expert in these things if you start to dabble with this. The con could also be, though, that you don't know what good looks like. So you don't know what to ask for. You don't know how to negotiate. And you're really at the mercy of these brands that may not know what they're doing either. So it's still quite a green field for B2B. I do think, though, that there's massive opportunity because I think what we were chatting about before we hit record was there's still so much power in a personal person connection than a brand, website, LinkedIn profile, et cetera. So there's so much opportunity. And I think that's exciting, but also maybe it can be a little bit of a hindrance to want to get started.
I agree. And I know that we're going to do quick takes on this type of episode. So as we wrap it up, I'd say for our listener that asked the question, pros and cons on both. Net, I'd say for myself personally, and I want to hear from you, Corrina, I would say net positive. I'm really glad that this kicked off for me in my career. I think it's net positive in I've been able to land jobs because of it. I've been able to network with people. I feel like I do have quite a lot of security should something happen and I need to make a change in my role. There's so many fantastic people that I've met doing this. I also think it's net positive for the company or brands that I've been associated with, knowing that they've actually gotten deals, opportunities, revenue directly from that presence. And my presence on LinkedIn is dwarfed in comparison to Corrina's. To wrap it, like net positive for you as well?
Net positive for sure. And I think that the great way to end on this too is that for both brand and person, the ROI may take a little time to show for these types of engagements, but it's there. So start investing now, start informing those relationships now, getting some experiences under your belt, but know that webinar, that piece of content, that's going to have a long shelf life for both parties. And the influence I've found with some companies I work with, it's funny. They'll say like, Corrina, they told us that they spoke to you 2.5 years ago, but didn't have the time or budget, but you recommended them to us and now they're doing it. So yes, but maybe it'll take a little bit longer to show, but net positive overall.
I have had so much fun in this one, giving everybody a little behind the scenes. These are the conversations that Corrina and I have on like a daily basis, and they can go on for hours, but we have capped the time limit on these. But please let us know. Get in touch with us if you have any questions like this listener had, or if you have any topics that you'd love for just Corrina and I to riff on.
Shoot us a LinkedIn message. Let us know. We're here for you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Direct with Corrina and Taylor.
If you enjoyed what you heard in today's episode, please give us a follow, maybe even a 5-star review, wherever you listen to your podcast.
And if you know someone that you'd like to spotlight, if you want to share your own story, visit us at motionagency.io/direct. We'd love to hear from you.